with the changing of the season comes the bane of so many of our existence, seasonal allergies. It's estimated that some 60 million Americans suffer from allergies and hundreds of millions worldwide. The symptoms, you know them, watery eye, runny nose, scratchy throat. They might come with the changing of the seasons, but they can also come just because you had contact with animals or pets, and of course there are food allergies as well. Today we have an arsenal of medications to address those, from those little over-the-counter pills to those needles with epinephrine in them that some people have to carry with them in case of a severe allergic reaction. The global market for antihistamines is estimated to reach around $280 million by 2023. But despite their omnipresence throughout history, it's only in the modern era that humans have come to understand what causes allergies and develop some methods for preventing them. It is history that deserves to be remembered. It's a widely held myth that allergies are reactions to modern environments. In fact, humans, along with many other species, have likely always suffered from allergies. Allergies are essentially hypersensitivities to particular antigens caused by an overactive immune system response to an otherwise harmless substance. While allergies likely existed in the ancient world, they did not seem to be recognized for what they were. In 1930, an archaeologist translated some hieroglyphics and determined that the first dynasty pharaoh Menes was killed by a wasp sting, although most experts now believe that this was a mistranslation and that he was actually killed by a hippopotamus. Another Egyptian physician was said to have healed the nostrils of a pharaoh in the 3rd millennium BC. In the 2nd millennium BC, Eber's papyrus contains prescriptions to relieve coughing and shortness of breath. The papyrus also suggests heating medicines on hot stones and breathing them in with a reed, an early kind of inhaler. The papyrus instructs its readers about treatment options for a man with copious discharge located in the forehead with watery eyes and a runny nose, classic symptoms of allergies. Ancient China had its own remedies for allergy symptoms. Treatments included the use of plants that could relieve nasal discharge and dilate bronchi, and they used ephedra, an extract which is still used today in asthma treatment. A 3rd century BC Chinese text also possibly refers to asthma. One is ill when he could not rest and breathe noisily. He is like an old man, both standing and at rest, and his breathing makes sounds. In the 5th century BC, Hippocrates described phlegm, a bodily fluid he thought caused congestion of the lungs. It's part of his theory of the 4 humors that controlled human health. He was likely among the first people to identify a correlation between the environment and respiratory ailments, and it is from the Greek that we get the word asthma, meaning panting. He noted that such persons as become hunchbacked from asthma or cough before puberty die. He also described a kind of inhaler where medicine was heated in a pot and then steam was inhaled. Pliny the Elder identified pollen as a cause of respiratory issues. Later, Roman author Aulus Aurelius Cornelius defined asthma as the inability to breathe without making noise or gasping. Roman Emperor Claudius seemed to have suffered from allergies and was described as having a permanently running nose. His son Britannicus was said to be so allergic to horses that he couldn't even ride them without his eyes swelling up. Britannicus's allergies may have played a part in Claudius's decision to marry Julia Agrippina. Her son Nero would take the throne and later have Britannicus killed. Hippocrates is also cited as the first to identify food allergens when he referred to hostile humors that made some men suffer badly when they ate cheese. Many scholars take the line, "What is food to one, to another is rank poison," from a poem by the 1st century BC Roman poet Lucretius, as a reference to food allergies. In the 10th century, Iranian physician Rhazes described nearly every clinical symptom of allergic rhinitis. What we know is hay fever. In the Middle Ages, doctor noted that flowers, particularly roses, could cause fits of sneezing and coughing. A better understanding of allergies didn't come along, though, until the early modern era. In 1552, a physician identified asthma as the disease from which an archbishop in Scotland was suffering. After a series of ineffective treatments, the doctor suggested that the archbishop stop sleeping on a feather bed, which brought immediate results. The archbishop may have been allergic to the feathers, or possibly to dust mites that can infest pillows. In Europe, physicians often blamed allergies on roses, leading to the term rose fever or rose catarrh, catarrh meaning a buildup of mucus. In 1656, a French doctor proved that his patient had a sensitivity to eggs when he placed a few egg particles on the patient's skin and blisters developed. Jean-Baptiste von Helmont reported asthmatic attacks in patients after eating fish, and also noted that asthma originated in the bronchi of the lungs. In 1699, a monk in Germany wrote the first detailed description of a reaction to a honeybee sting. And in 1765, a French doctor described a man who was stung by a honeybee and died shortly after. John Mudge invented a kind of inhaler out of a pewter tankard meant to treat coughs in 1778. In 1819, English physician John Bostock presented a study called Case of a Periodical Affection of the Eyes and the Chest in London. His patient, he said, had a rather delicate constitution and suffered from sneezing and itching in the summer. He called his patient J.B., but he was talking about himself. Since the age of 8, he had experienced the same symptoms every year, beginning in June. While a few others seemed convinced, he believed that it had something to do with change in season. He also described attempted cures, opium, purging, topical bleeding, and even courses of mercury. In the following years, Bostock tried to find others who suffered from similar symptoms, but was only able to find 28 cases. He dubbed the condition summer catarrh. He pressed other physicians to look at his findings, but remarked it was always considered by them as an anomalous train of symptoms, and no one appeared to have witnessed any occurrence of a similar kind. Though the medical establishment dismissed him, the concept was taking root in the minds of the public. An idea has generally prevailed, Bostock said, that the disease is produced by the smell from new hay, thus giving the illness a name: hay fever. Bostock thought the symptoms were brought on by the heat of summer and found that when he rented a house near the sea and relaxed, he nearly escaped the disease. By 1827, the Times in London reported that the Duke of Devonshire was afflicted with what is vulgarly called the hay fever, which generally drives him from London to some seaport. The doctors only found cases in the upper class. One scientist would go so far as to say that hay fever was almost wholly confined to the upper classes of society. In the 1850s, various inhalers, nebulizers, and atomizers were invented. The first was the French pulverizer to administer medicine. Physician Robert Willan, considered to be the founder of dermatology as a field of medicine, described hives appearing after patients ate almonds, mushrooms, and crabs, and fatal anaphylaxis in some patients after eating mussels and lobsters. In the 1800s, Charles Blackley, who suffered from allergies, closely studied possible causes, proving through meticulous work that the disease was caused by pollen. He invented allergy skin testing, applying pollens to his own skin and measuring the wheals that were produced, some inches in diameter and rising 3/4 of an inch from his skin. He specifically identified grass pollens as the cause and proved that even in tiny concentrations it could produce symptoms. He began taking pollen counts and found that pollen peaked in June and faded in July. Studying wind patterns and pollen concentrations, he determined pollen could travel for miles. He also found that farmers didn't suffer and considered that the patient was rendered insusceptible to the actions of pollens by continued exposure. Asthma powders, sprays, and even cigarettes were produced, thought to be effective ways of getting medicine to the lungs. Around the same period, Morrill Wyman in the United States induced an allergy attack by exposing himself to ragweed, which convinced him that ragweed caused autumnal catarrh. He produced some of the first pollen maps of the U.S., allowing sufferers to plan vacations to avoid the highest concentrations. Americans saw hay fever as an affliction of the wealthy, who vacationed often seeking relief. It was fashionable in the U.S. to have hay fever, and wealthy young people who made a big deal of their affliction could be mockingly called hay feverites. Daniel Webster, famed senator, frequently sought better air to strengthen him against the enemy, catarrh. The U.S. Hay Fever Association met in New Hampshire's White Mountains, which Wyman had identified as a location of low pollen counts. In 1902, the term anaphylaxis was coined by Charles Richet to describe extreme allergic responses. Properly, the term should be aphylaxis, but Richet preferred the cadence of anaphylaxis. Clemens von Pirquet coined the term allergy after observing that those given an injection of horse serum or the smallpox vaccine had quicker and more severe reactions to second injections. He deduced that the reactions were caused by the creation of antibodies. Soon, other allergies were determined to be a similar hypersensitive reaction, and allergies were proposed to play a role in asthma. These discoveries were not widely accepted at first. Many scientists in the new field of immunology were unconvinced that the protective immune system could be responsible for negative effects. Immunotherapy, inducing desensitization to an allergen via gradual exposure, was first used in the 1910s, and histamines were gradually discovered to be integral to the reaction. In 1912, Oskar Menderson Schloss began using scratch tests to diagnose food allergies, successfully diagnosing egg sensitivities. Prior to Schloss, the concept of food allergies was recognized but unproven. He brought a scientific edge to the study. Still, some patients who obviously were allergic would not react to scratch tests, and the inconsistency between individuals of severity continues to make diagnosis difficult. In the 1930s, two French allergists came to the conclusion that food allergies were much more common than believed, and that reactions were frequently misdiagnosed. By the 1930s, the term allergy was widely accepted, and the first antihistamines became available. The first really effective antihistamine was found in 1942, and in 1946, diphenhydramine was approved by the FDA as Benadryl. The drawback of Benadryl and other first-generation antihistamines is that they cause severe drowsiness. Antihistamines quickly became one of the most commonly prescribed classes of drugs. In 1948, corticosteroids were discovered as an effective treatment in asthma and allergic reactions. Growing understanding of allergies led to the development of non-biological soaps and allergy warning labels on consumer goods. In the 1950s, mast cells, which carry chemicals such as histamine to attack antigens, were discovered. In 1967, researchers made an even greater discovery: immunoglobulin E, the antibody responsible for most allergic reactions. When someone is exposed to an antigen, for instance peanuts or the venom in a bee sting, the body produces specific IgE antibodies in a process called sensitization. If the body creates disproportionate amounts of these antibodies, when the antigen is detected again, the reaction can be extreme, causing allergy symptoms. In the 1950s, the standard inhaler was a squeeze-bulb glass nebulizer, unable to administer a uniform dose and generally bulky and difficult to use. In 1956, Riker Laboratories, at the request of George Mason, president of the company and whose daughter suffered from asthma, to invent the Medihaler, the first pressurized measured dose inhaler, now ubiquitous as albuterol rescue inhalers. Epinephrine or adrenaline was used in the treatment of asthma starting in the 1890s, and by the 1940s, Anna kits were used, containing a vial of epinephrine, a syringe, and 2 tablets, which could be carried in case of a bee sting or allergic episode. Using the syringe to pull out a dose led to inconsistent dosing, and pre-dosed anapins were also used. It wasn't until the Cold War that a better solution was devised by NASA engineer and scientist Sheldon Kaplan. Initially, he invented an auto-injector called a combo pen that was filled with nerve gas antidote for the military, but soon filled it with epinephrine, inventing the EpiPen, approved by the FDA in 1987. Second-generation antihistamines were also approved in the 1980s and have the advantage of being more selective in their targeting of histamine receptors, significantly reducing drowsiness. Zyrtec was approved in 1987 and Claritin in 1988. In general, studies have shown that allergies and anaphylaxis are growing more common in the modern era, although it's less clear why. The hygiene hypothesis suggests that our cleanliness and decreased exposure to microbes and allergens in youth may make it more common. Vitamin D deficiency has also been found to increase the risk of developing allergies, and genetics play an important role as well. Of course, it's difficult to know how common allergies were before the modern age. And because we don't really know how prevalent allergies were before the modern era, we don't really know how big their effect has been on human history, but it certainly must have had some kind of effect. A U.S. Army study found that between 1942 and 1945, some 245,000 U.S. military troops were hospitalized due to allergic reactions, a number that's large enough to suggest that it's possible that some historic battles might have been impacted by hay fever. In fact, some of history's most famous generals have suffered from allergies. Napoleon Bonaparte had to have his hats lined in felt, since he was allergic to leather. George Patton suffered from hay fever and rhinitis. An attack almost kept him from attending Army War College in 1931. At least 5 U.S. presidents, including Theodore Roosevelt, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump, were known to have suffered from hay fever, as did King William IV, predecessor to Queen Victoria. Researchers continue to study the exact mechanisms that cause allergies and seek further treatments, but history's long experience with allergies have really only found ways to mitigate the suffering. We've yet to find a cure, which suggests that allergies will continue to afflict us well into the future. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history. And if you did enjoy, feed the algorithm by making a comment or clicking that like button. If you have suggestions for future episodes, please send those to our suggestions email box. Check out our webpage at thehistoryguy.net. And of course, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can book a special message from the History Guy on Cameo and check out our merchandise at teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes of Forgotten History, all you need to do is subscribe.